And speaking of Supreme Court cases where I don't believe there was a circuit split, we have the NRA case and not the NRA First Amendment case, not a Second Amendment case. So maybe a little bit out of what we normally talk about, but it does involve the NRA and its advocacy for gun rights. So I definitely think it's one of the stories that's worth following. And one of the particularly interesting twists in this story is that the DOJ filed a brief that was not in support of either side, I guess, technically, but ultimately came down on the idea that the gun rights group's First Amendment rights were violated by this New York financial official.
Yeah, the Supreme Court looks to be almost certainly willing and going to rule in favor of the NRA and vindicate their First Amendment rights against the state of New York. The fact that the United States Department of Justice, run by Joe Biden and Merrick Garland, is coming out effectively. Well, they may not say they're in support of the NRA, but the fact that they're not in support of New York basically means they're in support of the NRA. And the fact that the ACLU has announced their support, at least the national office, I believe, has announced their support and is going to argue the case in favor of the NRA and for the NRA. I think that tells you where this is going to go.
Yeah, a lot of strange bedfellows, but I think it gives you good insight.
Yeah, the First Amendment still remains important. And I think that the critical thing to understand about this case, Stephen, is, the New York says that we, the government, have the right to exercise First Amendment rights and speak out on issues. And that's true. There's no doubt that the government has the legal authority to speak out on issues no different than any other American entity or American. They can talk about whatever they want and use the power of persuasion to say, we think this is good, or we think this is bad, we think race discrimination is bad, whatever. They can say these things, and that's allowed. What's not allowed, and that's what's alleged here in the NRA case before the Supreme Court, is that the state of New York did not just argue what they like or what they think is good policy. They took it to the next level. And according to the allegations, certain officials in the state of New York, including the head or one of the heads of the financial regulators of New York, basically was suggesting to NRA's business partners, financial partners, that maybe they need to stop doing business with the NRA, because if they don't stop doing business with the NRA, there may be some possible regulatory repercussions that they may not like in their other lines of business. And the allegations, and these are all just allegations, we don't know if they're true or not, but the allegations in the NRA complaint is that a lot of their business partners and financial partners said, well, we can't do business with you, NRA, anymore, because we feel threatened by what the state of New York is saying. Keep in mind that whether you like it or not, Wall Street and New York to this very day is the financial capital of the world. If you are a business, if you're a bank, if you're a financial house, if you're an insurance company, you really have to touch fingers with New York State, because that is where massive amounts of wealth transfers through to the banks, the financial institutions, and so on. So if the lead financial regulator in the state of New York is hinting that maybe they're not going to be happy with you and maybe they're going to impose additional regulatory requirements or audits or other bad things to you and your big business, well, you can see why that might cause people to say, well, I don't really need this headache. The NRA is not that big of a client. We can just drop them, and we can make money with all sorts of other ways. So you could at least understand how this could play out. As to whether or not that's what happened, only time will tell. But I think the Supreme Court is going to say that the state of New York is not allowed to threaten people because of viewpoint discrimination. And I think it's going to be pretty obvious that New York State, given how they behaved after Bruen and how they behaved for the last 10 or 15 years when it comes to the right of the people to keep and bear arms, they've called the NRA every name in the book. So I think showing a motive is not going to be very difficult for the NRA in this case. The question is, what happened in those alleged conversations between New York State regulators and those business and financial partners? And of course, that's always a question of fact. And that's really what the NRA is arguing. They're saying, look, we haven't even had a chance to prove our case. We've made allegations. If the allegations are true, we're going to win this case under the First Amendment. We want the opportunity to prove our case. And the court dismissed our case, so we never had that opportunity. And I think the Supreme Court's going to give them that opportunity and send this case back and say, carry on with the lawsuit.
Yeah, honestly, their allegations are maybe even a little bit more direct than that, because it was the insurers that they were working with at the time. It was Lloyd's London and Lockton, and they claim that Maria Vullo, who was the financial regulator at the center of this case, that she just literally told them they would face financial inquiries or punishment for some infractions that they had made unrelated to the NRA unless they dropped the NRA, and specifically because she didn't like the NRA's political point of view. Now, those were in meetings that were private. And then on top of that, she'd sent letters to these companies that on the one hand spell out like, yo, you shouldn't do business with them because they're a gun promotion organization and other companies are dropping them in the wake of Parkland shooting and some of this stuff. And then at the end, it talks about how, dropping the NRA is an example of good governance, which is obviously an issue under New York law, because that's part of what she regulates, whether these companies are carrying out their fiduciary responsibilities. And so it was interesting, though, to see the DOJ making a bit of a distinction, especially in that letter. They wanted to focus on the meetings and the allegations that she just directly threatened these companies. But they said that most of the letter was okay because it's just her trying to persuade and that government officials can make their case and they can argue for, a company to operate a certain way or not. But what they can't do is make an explicit threat. And they kind of got a little bit more vague about whether the letter constituted threats. They just wanted the court to focus on the meetings. I'm interested in your thoughts on DOJ's motivation here. Like, why get involved? They gave a couple reasons, right? They said, it's a First Amendment case, and so the government has an interest in all of these sorts of cases because it governs, how we operate. And then they also referred to specific cases. I think there was a social media case that's ongoing where the DOJ has a position that government officials can kind of offer advice to private companies on how to operate. And that's complies with the First Amendment. And they're trying to perhaps use this case as a contrast where they're saying, look, we weren't doing this. This is obviously bad, but what we did here is fine. Is that kind of how you see this?
Yeah, I think the Department of Justice under Joe Biden and Merrick Garland have filed this amicus brief in the NRA case for a couple of reasons. And the first one is it's a relatively straightforward case that we pretty much know how this is going to come out. The Supreme Court's going to rule for the NRA and send this case back for further fact-finding. So really, it's not going to impact who's going to win this case. Okay, I think if it was a line call, I could see DOJ looking to go against the NRA politically, but I think because it's pretty clear how this is going to be ruled on by the Supreme Court, this is like the DOJ can put in a document that's really a form of virtue signaling. They can say, see, we are bipartisan. We just follow where the rule of law takes us. We do all this terrible stuff to the gun owners, just terrible stuff to the NRA. We search we do gun transactions, research that we may not be allowed to do. We do all sorts of terrible things to gun owners all across America. And we take all the positions against gun owners in the Supreme Court and the Rahimi case and so on and so on and so on. But we're really just being even-handed members of the judiciary and members of DOJ. And here's an example where we actually basically did not go against the NRA in this case. But of course, the reality is, their involvement has no meaningful outcome. So really, I think this document from the Department of Justice is mostly virtue signaling. It is a PR ploy so they can say down the road, look, we're fair and honest brokers. We'll see, we came out. We didn't go after the NRA. We came out kind of in favor of them. That's number one. The second thing is they do want to try to remind the Supreme Court and encourage the court to try to issue a narrow ruling to say, well, on these facts as alleged, in these unique set of facts as alleged by the NRA, this can give rise to a cause of action. So let them engage in discovery and just keep the ruling narrowly confined and don't issue any broad proclamations or anything like that that could be used against other blue states that are going after the NRA or trying to do bad things to gun owners or, talking out against, because if you look at the Biden administration, it seems to me their entire campaign for 2024, and I'm not like a political strategist here, it's just a sense I'm getting from reading the papers, it's all about, we want to stop MAGA extremists. We want to stop, white extremists. We want to stop gun owners, right? White, what I don't know what they're calling now. What is the most recent phrase? Domestic terrorists, domestic extremists. I've lost track of all these sort of propaganda terms, the Biden administration. So it's pretty clear that a big part of the campaign of the Biden administration is to say that anyone that supports Donald Trump, anyone that supports the Republican Party, anyone that supports conservatism or the rule of law or the Constitution is somehow very, very bad, and they're going to engage in ad hominem attacks against these people. So I'm guessing DOJ also is cognizant of this fact and wants to be clear that the government can say anything nasty they want about their opponents politically. They just can't, in this narrow circumstance, threaten people from doing business with those same people. And I think they're walking that fine line. And that's what I get out of that DOJ brief.